Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight we begin with a question that feels both ancient and surprisingly modern. What did it actually take to be considered beautiful in ancient Egypt? It's a world of kohl, wigs, and some rather intense hygiene routines. But black isn't the only color for your eyes. Next comes the eyeshadow, a powder made from ground malachite. A vibrant green copper ore is applied to your eyelids, adding a flash of color and life. The coffee house was a space of creative friction. By bringing together people from different walks of life, merchants, scientists, poets, politicians, it created an environment where ideas from one field could spark innovations in another. A new mathematical concept discussed by scientists might give a merchant a new way to calculate risk. A political pamphlet might inspire a poet to write a satire. This cross-pollination of ideas is a powerful engine of creativity and progress. The coffee house, by breaking down the silos that separated different professions, became an accidental incubator for the modern world, a place where the friction between different minds generated the spark of new ideas. Now, as we drift even deeper, let the very concept of history dissolve. History is a story we tell about the past, a way of imposing order on the chaos of what has been. But in this moment, on the edge of sleep, you can let that order go. There is no need for narratives or explanations. There is only this moment. The feeling of the blankets around you, the soft, ambient sounds of your room, the gentle rising and falling of your chest. This is the only reality that matters now. The past is a dream, the future is unknown, and the present moment is a quiet, safe harbor. Rest here. There is nothing else you need to do. Let's consider the concept of ma'at in ancient Egypt, which is crucial to understanding their worldview. Ma'at was the principle of truth, balance, order, harmony, law, morality, and justice. It was the fundamental order of the universe, established by the gods at creation. The pharaoh's primary duty was to uphold ma'at. An individual's goal was to live a life in accordance with ma'at. Their beauty standards were a physical expression of this concept. The symmetry of the kohl-lined eyes, the cleanliness of the body, the orderliness of the wig, all of these were attempts to create a small pocket of ma'at on the human form to reflect the divine order of the cosmos in one's own appearance. It was a deeply philosophical act. One of the most comical aspects of the Emu War is how seriously the military initially took it. Major Meredith, in his reports, refers to the emus as having amazing tactical ability and being invulnerable. He describes them as cunning opponents who could withstand heavy machine gun fire. From his perspective, trapped in the frustrating reality of the situation, this must have felt true. But from the outside, it reads like a man desperately trying to maintain his dignity while being outmaneuvered by a creature with a brain the size of a walnut. It's a classic case of projection, ascribing intelligence and strategy to what was simply a very effective, if mindless, survival instinct. The emus didn't need to be smart, they just needed to be emus. The island of Wen, under Tycho's rule, was not just a scientific paradise. It was also a feat of engineering. He constructed a sophisticated system of ponds and aqueducts to power the machinery in his workshops and paper mill. He had his own artisans and craftsmen living on the island, a small community dedicated to the service of his scientific vision. In many ways, Uraniborg was a precursor to modern big science projects like CERN or the space program, requiring a massive investment of resources, a large and specialized staff, and a centralized visionary leader. Tycho was not just an astronomer. He was a project manager on a celestial scale, a CEO of a cosmic enterprise. The culture of the coffee house was built on a foundation of cheap, new consumer goods. Coffee from Arabia and Yemen, sugar from the Caribbean colonies, and tobacco from the Americas. These three commodities, all once exotic luxuries, became affordable staples for a growing middle class. The coffee house was the social nexus where these products were consumed, and their consumption fueled a new kind of globalized economy. The conversations about liberty and enlightenment were literally steeped in the products of a vast and often brutal colonial network. The story of the coffee house is also a story about the rise of global trade and the complex, often dark, history of the products we take for granted. As your mind continues to soften and drift, you might notice that the boundary between your thoughts and the stories you've heard begins to blur. An image of a golden necklace might merge with a memory from your day. The sound of a rattling machine gun might fade into the hum of a fan. This is a good sign. It means you are letting go. You are allowing the conscious ordering part of your mind to take a rest. You are drifting into the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, a place of strange and gentle connections. There is no need to hold on to any single thought. Just let them all float by, like clouds in a quiet sky. The Egyptians' use of jewelry was also deeply symbolic. Gold, with its imperishable nature and its resemblance to the sun, was considered the flesh of the gods. Lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone imported at great expense from the mountains of what is now Afghanistan, represented the heavens and the life-giving waters of the Nile. Carnelian, a reddish-orange stone, was associated with blood and life force. When an Egyptian wore a broad collar necklace of gold, lapis, and carnelian, they were draping themselves in a microcosm of their universe. They were wearing the sun, the sky, and life itself. It was a powerful statement of their place in the cosmic order. The failure of the first emu war led to a peculiar kind of arms race. The emus, of course, did not change. But the farmers did. They became more adept at building emu-proof fencing. They learned the birds' habits and patterns. The government bounty system provided a consistent, long-term pressure. The response became more tailored, more intelligent. It's a classic example of adaptation. The initial shock of the war forced the human population to evolve its strategies. The emus, by being so stubbornly themselves, forced their human opponents to become smarter, more patient, and ultimately more effective. The birds were, in their own way, excellent teachers. Let's consider the fate of Johannes Kepler after he inherited Tycho's data. His life was not an easy one. He was plagued by poverty, religious persecution, and family tragedy. Yet he persisted for years in his obsessive calculations, trying to make sense of Mars's orbit. The moment of his great discovery was not a sudden flash of insight, but the culmination of a long and grueling struggle. He famously wrote that he first had to wage a war on Mars, a war of mathematics and perseverance. His final victory, the discovery of elliptical orbits, was a triumph of sheer mental grit. It was a testament to the idea that great breakthroughs are often born not of effortless genius, but of relentless, stubborn work. Cleanliness is paramount. It's considered next to godliness a sign of a pure and ordered person. Most Egyptians, rich or poor, would bathe daily in the Nile or in basins at home, using a type of soap made from animal fats and chalk. The coffee house was, in essence, an information technology. Before the internet, before the telephone, before the telegraph, the coffee house was the most efficient system ever devised for the rapid collection, dissemination, and analysis of information. It was a social network made of wood, smoke, and caffeine. It operated on a simple principle: get as many knowledgeable people as possible into a single room and let them talk. The result was an exponential increase in the speed and efficiency of communication, which in turn accelerated the pace of innovation in every field, from science to finance to politics. It was the original information superhighway, and now the journey is truly ending. The last story has been told. The last connection has been made. The only thing that remains is the deep, quiet peace of the coming sleep. Feel the gentle pull of it. It's a soft, warm tide, pulling you away from the shore of the waking world. Don't resist it. Let it take you. Let it carry you out into the calm, dark ocean of rest. Let the narrator's voice be the last thing you notice, and then let that too fade away, leaving only the sound of your own quiet breathing in the peaceful darkness. Sleep well. The Egyptian concept of the body was not singular but plural. They believed a person was composed of several parts. The khat, the physical body. The ka, the life force or spiritual double. The ba, the personality or soul. The shuyet, the shadow. And the ren, the name. For a person to achieve immortality, all these parts had to be preserved and protected after death. This is why tombs were so elaborate. They were not just graves. They were houses of eternity, designed to sustain every aspect of a person's being. The art, the spells from the Book of the Dead, the mummification, all of it was a complex system designed to keep these various components of the self from scattering after death, a holistic approach to eternal life. Let's think about the emus. Perspective for a moment, if we can call it that. For millennia, they had followed the same migratory patterns, moving from inland areas toward the coast after their breeding season. Suddenly, in the 1920s, they arrived at their usual feeding grounds to find a massive all-you-can-eat buffet. The newly established wheat farms were a paradise. From the emu's point of view, the humans were not owners of the land, but simply very helpful gardeners who had planted an enormous feast for them. The arrival of men with loud, frightening sticks was a confusing and unwelcome interruption to this wonderful new arrangement. They weren't fighting a war, they were just trying to get back to their dinner. Tycho Brahe's greatest contribution was, in a sense, his embrace of error. Before him, if an observation didn't fit a theory, the astronomer might be tempted to fudge the data or dismiss the observation as a mistake. Tycho's obsession with accuracy meant that he trusted his data more than he trusted the ancient theories. When his observations of Mars refused to fit a perfect circle, he didn't throw out the observations. He and Kepler kept wrestling with them. That tiny discrepancy, just 8 arc minutes of error, was the crack in the old cosmos through which a new universe was revealed. It was a powerful lesson. The most interesting discoveries are often hiding in the small, stubborn errors that refuse to go away. The coffee house was a uniquely urban phenomenon. It required a high density of people and a rapid flow of information to thrive. It was a product of the city, and in turn, it helped to create the modern city as we know it, a center of commerce, culture, and intellectual life. The close proximity of different people and different ideas in an urban environment creates a kind of creative energy, and the coffee house was the institution that harnessed that energy most effectively. It was the living room of the city, the place where the urban hive mind could gather to think, to argue, and to dream. The story of the coffee house is inseparable from the story of London, Paris, and the rise of the great metropolises of the world. As we let go of these final thoughts, let's focus on the feeling of gratitude for the simple act of rest. In a world that so often values productivity and constant activity, choosing to rest is a quiet act of self-care. It is a recognition that our bodies and minds need time to recover, to process, and to heal. It is not an absence of activity, but an essential activity in its own right. So as you lie here, feel a sense of gratitude for this time, for this quiet space you have created for yourself. You have earned this rest. Allow yourself to receive it fully, without reservation or guilt. The ancient Egyptians also had a form of toothpaste, a powder made from crushed rock salt, mint, dried iris flowers, and pepper. It was a rather abrasive mixture, but it demonstrates their deep-seated concern with oral hygiene. They also used breath fresheners, chewing on herbs like parsley or frankincense. This focus on cleanliness extended to every part of the body. It was a holistic system of self-care that was deeply intertwined with their concepts of purity and order. To be beautiful was to be clean, to be well-groomed, and to present an orderly and harmonious self to the world and to the gods. It was a way of life, not just a morning routine. The term Emu War is itself a piece of journalistic brilliance. It's a hyperbole that perfectly captures the absurdity of the situation. Calling it the emu culling operation would have been more accurate, but far less memorable. The name transformed a minor agricultural issue into a mock epic conflict. It gave the story a narrative structure, casting the emus as a surprisingly formidable enemy and the military as a slightly bumbling protagonist. This framing was key to its enduring appeal. It's a reminder of the power of a good headline. The pen, in this case, was not mightier than the sword, but it was certainly mightier and funnier than the machine gun. After his death, Tycho Brahe's magnificent observatory, Uraniborg, was abandoned. Within a few decades, it was in ruins. His instruments were scattered across Europe. It's a poignant end for such a grand vision. But, in another sense, Uraniborg was never destroyed. Its true form was not the bricks and mortar of the castle, but the columns of numbers in Tycho's logbooks. That data, the product of 20 years of tireless observation, was the real treasure of the island. And that treasure was carried away safely by Kepler. The physical structure was temporary, but the knowledge it produced was immortal, becoming the bedrock for the next 2 centuries of astronomical progress. After bathing, you would anoint your skin with perfumed oils and unguents. These moisturize your skin in the dry climate and act as a perfume. Common scents included lily, myrrh, and cinnamon, kept in beautiful alabaster jars. One of the key rules in many London coffee houses was no wagers over 5 shillings. This was to prevent the lively atmosphere of debate and discussion from degenerating into a noisy gambling den. The focus was meant to be on the exchange of ideas, not the exchange of money in games of chance. However, the entire enterprise of the financial coffee houses, like Jonathan's or Lloyd's, was built on a form of high-stakes gambling, speculating on stock prices or underwriting the risk of a sea voyage. It was a fine line between intellectual discourse and financial speculation, and the coffee house was the place where that line was constantly being negotiated, defining the boundaries of a new capitalist culture. The final moments before sleep are a gentle letting go. It's a quiet surrender. You are surrendering the day's worries, the plans for tomorrow, the endless chatter of the conscious mind. You are trusting that the world will continue to turn without your constant supervision. This surrender is not a sign of weakness, but of profound trust. Trust in the rhythms of your own body, trust in the safety of your surroundings. It is a small act of faith, repeated every night. As you feel yourself on the edge of that surrender, embrace it. Let go of the need to control, and allow yourself to be carried into the deep and restorative peace of sleep. Let's consider the Egyptian wig from a craftsman's perspective. Creating a high-quality wig was a highly skilled and labor-intensive process. Human hair was the most prized material, often sorted by length and quality. It would be washed, combed, and then painstakingly woven or knotted onto a mesh cap made of linen or other fibers. Plant fibers, like palm leaf fibers, could be used for cheaper versions. The hair would then be set into elaborate braids or curls using beeswax and resin, and sometimes dyed black. A single wig could take weeks to produce. It was a luxury good, a product of specialized craftsmanship, and a testament to the importance the Egyptians placed on this particular aspect of their appearance. The Great Emu War has become a kind of national myth in Australia, a story told with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. It's a classic underdog story, but one where the nation itself is the bumbling giant and the underdog is a large, flightless bird. It speaks to a certain self-deprecating quality in the Australian national character, a willingness to laugh at one's own failures. The story endures because it's a perfect encapsulation of the futility of trying to impose human order on a wild and unpredictable continent. It's a foundational story that says, in essence, even our army couldn't defeat the wildlife here. It's a humorous admission of a deeper truth about the country's relationship with its unique environment. The mystery of Tycho Brahe's death adds a final layer of drama to his life. The burst bladder story, while memorable, has been challenged by modern forensic science. In 2010, his body was exhumed again. An analysis of his hair and bones showed levels of mercury that were high, but perhaps not lethally so. The current consensus is leaning back toward a severe bladder infection, but the possibility of mercury poisoning, either accidental from his alchemical work or even deliberate at the hands of a rival, can't be entirely ruled out. This ambiguity is somehow fitting for a man who lived at the crossroads of science and mysticism. His death, like his life, remains a puzzle, a final, unsolved mystery. The rise of the coffee house in Europe coincided with the Little Ice Age, a period of cooler temperatures. This may have contributed to the appeal of a hot, stimulating beverage. But more importantly, the coffee house provided a warm, comfortable public space for people to gather during the cold months. It was a refuge from the damp and chilly streets, a place of warmth, light, and sociability. The physical comfort of the coffee house was an essential part of its appeal. It created a welcoming environment that encouraged people to linger, to talk, and to participate in the intellectual life of the city. It was a literal and metaphorical shelter from the storm. As you lie in the quiet darkness, you are in a space that is both personal and universal. Millions of other people, in different time zones, in different beds, are doing the exact same thing. They are letting go of their day, quieting their minds, and preparing for rest. There is a sense of shared humanity in this simple, nightly ritual. You are not alone in your need for peace and restoration. You are part of a great, silent community of sleepers, all turning away from the busy world for a few hours of quiet renewal. Let this thought be a comfort, a feeling of connection. As you drift away, we have focused on the more glamorous side of Egyptian beauty, but for the common laborer, life was very different. While cleanliness was still valued, the elaborate wigs, cosmetics, and jewelry were far beyond their means. Their beauty was a more rugged, sun-baked kind. Their bodies were shaped by physical labor, not by idealized artistic conventions. However, even the simplest tomb might contain a small, crude cosmetic palette or a pot of kohl, showing that the desire to participate in this culture of beauty and divine protection was universal. It was a fundamental part of being Egyptian, regardless of one's station in life. The press coverage of the Emu War can be seen as an early example of meme culture. The story was just too good, too shareable to remain a local news item. The image of soldiers versus emus was instantly understandable and inherently comical. It spread through newspapers and word of mouth, with each telling perhaps adding a little more embellishment. The core elements, the powerful but ineffective military, the surprisingly resilient birds, the guerrilla warfare analogies, were the 1932 equivalent of a viral story. Its persistence in our collective memory today is a testament to the power of a simple, compelling, and deeply funny narrative. Tycho Brahe's Tychonic system was a brilliant failure. It was mathematically sound, and it fit the observational data available at the time. Its primary virtue was that it preserved the privileged position of the Earth, which was a major philosophical and theological sticking point for many people. It was a deeply conservative model, an attempt to reconcile the new, precise data with the old, comfortable worldview. It served as a popular alternative to the Copernican system for over a century. It's a powerful example of how scientific progress is not a simple linear path. There are often complex hybrid theories that serve as temporary bridges between old paradigms and new ones. Now, for the hair, or rather, the lack of it. It's brutally hot, and lice are a constant nuisance. So, for both hygiene and style, you, like most Egyptians of a certain class, keep your head completely shaved. The coffeehouse was also a male-dominated space. The women's petition against coffee may have been a satire, likely written by a man, but it points to a real social division. The public sphere of the coffeehouse was largely off-limits to respectable women. Their domain was the home. This exclusion meant that the intellectual and political revolutions fostered in the coffeehouses were, by and large, revolutions conceived of by men. The new ideas of liberty and individual rights were not, at first, extended to women. The story of the coffeehouse is also a story about the construction of gender roles and the long struggle for women to gain access to the public square. The process of falling asleep is like a slow, gentle, quiet darkness and a mind that is at peace. Trust in this ancient process and let it unfold at its own pace. The ancient Egyptian obsession with youthfulness in their art is striking. Even statues of aged pharaohs often depict them with the smooth skin and athletic build of a young man. This was not because they denied the reality of aging, but because their art was not meant to be a literal portrait. It was meant to capture the eternal, idealized essence of a person. In the afterlife, one would be reborn into a perfect, youthful state, free from the ravages of time. The art was a magical tool to help ensure this transformation. They were not just carving a likeness, they were carving a destiny. After the military's withdrawal, the emu problem in Western Australia didn't just disappear. The government-instituted bounty system created a new kind of profession, the emu hunter. For many struggling farmers and laborers during the Depression, hunting emus for a bounty became a viable, if not glamorous, source of income. It was a gritty, difficult job, but it was a more practical and sustainable approach to population control than a full-scale military deployment. The solution evolved from a centralized, top-down failure to a decentralized, economically driven success, a classic lesson in public policy. Tycho's loss of his nose in a duel over mathematics seems absurd, but it speaks to the passionate and honor-driven culture of the Renaissance nobility. Intellectual disputes were not just abstract debates. They could be matters of personal honor, as serious as any other insult. The duel was a collision of two worlds, the emerging world of scientific rationalism and the older world of aristocratic chivalry. Tycho, with his brilliant mind and his hot-headed noble pride, was a man who lived in both. The duel and its permanent consequence, the prosthetic nose, became a physical symbol of the conflicting forces that shaped his life and his era. The coffee house was instrumental in the creation of a modern reading public. The availability of newspapers, pamphlets, and books, combined with the culture of discussion and debate, fostered a new level of literacy and critical engagement. People didn't just read. They read in order to discuss, to argue, and to form opinions. This active social model of reading was a powerful force for political and social change. It created a more informed and engaged citizenry, which in turn demanded greater accountability from its rulers. The simple act of reading a newspaper in a coffee house was a small but revolutionary act. Let your awareness now rest on the simple sensation of breathing. Feel the air enter your nostrils, cool and fresh. Follow it down into your lungs. Feel your chest or your abdomen gently rise. And then feel the gentle release as you exhale, letting the warm air go. There is no need to change your breathing or control it. Just observe it. This simple, repetitive rhythm is the anchor that can keep your mind from wandering. It is the steady, quiet drumbeat of your own life. Rest in that rhythm. Let it be the only thing in your awareness as you drift closer and closer to sleep. The concept of divine beauty in Egypt meant that the gods themselves were the ultimate trendsetters. The goddess Hathor, associated with beauty, love, and joy, was often depicted with the same kohl-lined eyes and graceful features as the human women who worshipped her. By emulating the appearance of the gods, an Egyptian was not just making themselves more attractive, they were making themselves more divine. It was a way of bridging the gap between the mortal and the immortal, of bringing a little piece of the sacred into their daily lives. Makeup was a form of prayer, and the body was a temple to be decorated. The legacy of the Great Emu War extends into the realm of military jargon. It has become a shorthand for any poorly planned or futile military operation, particularly one where the objective is ill-defined or the enemy is misunderstood. To call a mission an Emu War is to label it as an embarrassing failure, a waste of resources against a problem that could not be solved by military force. The story has become a cautionary tale taught, perhaps informally, to military planners around the world. Know your enemy, and make sure you are using the right tools for the job. In place of your natural hair, you select a wig. These were complex creations, crafted from human hair or plant fibers and styled into intricate braids and curls. The more elaborate the wig, the higher your status. Tycho Brahe was a man of immense contradictions. He was an exacting scientist who believed in prophecy. He was a tyrannical landlord who was a generous patron to his assistants. He created a cosmological model that was both revolutionary in its reliance on data and deeply conservative in its conclusions. This complexity is what makes him so fascinating. He was not a simple hero of science, but a flawed, brilliant, and deeply human figure, caught in the transition between a medieval world of magic and a modern world of mathematics. He embodies the messy, contradictory, and often irrational process of scientific revolution. The coffee house was a place of intellectual leveling. Inside its walls, a poor student could engage in debate with a wealthy merchant, and a young poet could challenge the ideas of an established literary figure. This was a radical departure from the strict social hierarchies that governed the rest of society. The price of admission was a penny, and the currency of status was wit and reason. This egalitarian spirit, even if it was limited and temporary, was a powerful social experiment. It demonstrated that a society could be organized around principles of merit and open discourse, an idea that would become central to modern democratic thought. The darkness behind your closed eyes is not empty. It is a space of potential, a canvas for dreams. As you continue to relax, allow yourself to welcome that darkness. It is a peaceful, quiet place, free from the endless stimulation of the visual world. It is a place of rest for your eyes and for your mind. Let go of any remaining images from your day and allow your mind to settle into this gentle, velvety blackness. It is a safe and comforting space, the antechamber to the world of sleep. Rest here in this peaceful, personal darkness. Let's consider the tools of Egyptian beauty. The cosmetic palettes, often carved from siltstone in the shape of animals like fish or turtles, were used for grinding the kohl and malachite. The applicators were thin sticks of wood, bone, or ivory. The razors for shaving were made of bronze. The tweezers for plucking stray hairs were also bronze. These were not disposable items. They were valuable, well-crafted tools that would be kept for a lifetime and taken to the grave. They were part of a personal toolkit for the maintenance of the self, a collection of essential instruments for constructing one's identity. The environmental context of the Emu War is key. The conflict was not just a result of the emus' migration, it was exacerbated by human activity. The development of agriculture in Western Australia had provided the emus with a new, reliable source of food and water, which likely contributed to a population boom. In a sense, the farmers had created their own problem. They had altered the ecosystem in a way that made it more hospitable to the very creatures that were now plaguing them. The war was a dramatic consequence of a much slower, more complex interaction between human settlement and the natural environment. Tycho Brahe's relationship with his royal patrons was a delicate dance. He depended on their money and protection to fund his lavish scientific enterprise. In return, he provided them with astrological predictions, courtly prestige, and the occasional alchemical medicine. It was a symbiotic relationship. Tycho got his observatory, and the king got a world-famous intellectual at his court, a living symbol of his kingdom's wisdom and sophistication. But this dependence on patronage also made him vulnerable. When the political winds changed and a new king came to power, his funding and his island kingdom could be taken away. A stark reminder that even the most brilliant science is often subject to the whims of power and politics. The coffee house helped to create a new rhythm for the business day. Before, business might be conducted at all hours, in homes or taverns. The coffee house created a dedicated, public space for commerce, and its hours of operation helped to structure the working day. Merchants knew they could find their colleagues and competitors at a certain coffee house at a certain time. This created a more efficient and predictable environment for business. The 9 to 5 inches workday has its distant roots in the daily comings and goings of the merchants, brokers, and underwriters who frequented the coffee houses of 17th century London. Feel the gentle pull of gravity. It is a constant, steady presence, holding you securely. Allow yourself to surrender to that pull. Let your muscles release any remaining tension and allow your body to feel heavy and relaxed. Let your bones sink into the mattress. There is no need to hold yourself up anymore. You are completely supported. This feeling of being held and supported can be deeply comforting. It is a physical reminder that you are safe and can let go. Allow this feeling of heavy, secure relaxation to spread through your entire body, from the tips of your toes to the top of your head. The Egyptian ideal of slender, youthful bodies was a reflection of the elite class that produced the art. For the wealthy, who had a reliable food supply and did not perform hard manual labor, staying slim may have been a sign of self-control and refinement. For the vast majority of the population, the farmers and laborers, life was a constant struggle for sustenance, and their bodies reflected the toil of their work. The art, therefore, does not show us what all Egyptians looked like, but what the elite class aspired to look like, both in this life and the next. It was a beauty standard born of privilege. The story of the Emu War is ultimately a story about perspective. From the farmer's perspective, it was a desperate struggle for survival. From the soldier's perspective, it was a frustrating and humiliating fiasco. From the government's perspective, it was a public relations nightmare. From the emu's perspective, it was a confusing interruption of a good meal. And from our perspective, a century later, it is a wonderfully absurd historical anecdote. The truth of the event depends entirely on where you stand. This multiplicity of perspectives is what makes history so endlessly fascinating. There is never just one story. Your wig is held in place with beeswax and resin, a sort of ancient, heavy-duty hairspray. Some were even adorned with gold tubes or precious beads catching the light as you moved. They were hot, but they were fashion. Tycho Brahe's meticulous record-keeping was his most important legacy. He recorded not just the positions of the stars and planets, but also the date, the time, the instruments used, and even the weather conditions. This created a rich data set that allowed for the analysis of potential errors. He was pioneering the modern scientific method, with its emphasis on repeatable experiments and the careful documentation of data. He understood that science was not about grand philosophical pronouncements, but about the patient, humble accumulation of facts. His greatest instrument was not his giant quadrant, but his ledger book. The conversations in coffee houses were fueled by a new kind of intellectual curiosity. The Renaissance and the scientific revolution had created a sense that the world was full of new discoveries to be made. The old certainties were breaking down, and everything was up for debate. The coffee house was the perfect environment for this new spirit of inquiry. It was a place where you could challenge established ideas, propose new theories, and hear about the latest discoveries from across Europe. It was a place for people who were not content with the old answers, but were driven by a restless curiosity to find new ones. As we come to the very end of our journey tonight, let's take a moment to simply be present. Notice the quiet. Notice the stillness. Your mind may be calmer now, the stories having served their purpose of gently distracting it from the day's concerns. The path to sleep is clear. There are no more obstacles, no more destinations to reach. There is only this peaceful present moment, and the gentle, inevitable drift into rest. Let the last vestiges of thought dissolve like sugar in a warm drink. Let the silence envelop you. Good night. The Egyptian use of henna is another fascinating aspect of their beauty regimen. Henna, a dye made from the leaves of the henna plant, was used to stain the fingernails, palms of the hands, and soles of the feet a reddish-brown color. Mummies have been found with their nails still stained with henna after thousands of years. This practice had both cosmetic and, it was believed, medicinal properties. It was another way of bringing color, life, and protective power to the body, a final touch in the elaborate process of creating a beautiful and divinely ordered self. It's interesting to note that the request for military assistance against the emus was made by a delegation of soldiers-turned-farmers. These men had first-hand experience of the effectiveness of machine guns in the First World War. They likely saw the emu problem through the lens of their military training. They saw a numerous and destructive enemy, and their instinct was to call for overwhelming firepower. Their proposed solution was a direct result of their personal history. It was a classic example of the saying, quote, "If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail." Or in this case, if you're an old soldier, everything looks like a target. Tycho Brahe was not just an observer. He was also a great popularizer of science. His book on the supernova of 1572, De Nova Stella, was a bestseller. He wrote in a clear and accessible style, and he used his own printing press at Uraniborg to publish his findings and distribute them throughout Europe. He understood the importance of communicating his work to a wider audience. He was not content to be a solitary scholar. He wanted to shape the intellectual conversation of his time. This desire to share his knowledge, combined with his undeniable genius for observation, is what made him such a towering figure in his own lifetime. The physical environment of the coffee house was often quite basic. The furniture was simple and functional, long wooden tables and benches. The lighting, from candles or oil lamps, would have been dim. The air was thick with smoke. It was not a place of great luxury. The appeal was not in the physical comfort, but in the social and intellectual stimulation. People were drawn to the coffee house not for its decor, but for its company. It was a space that was defined by the people within it, a testament to the fact that the most valuable part of any community is the conversation that happens there. The transition into sleep is a transition into the world of the subconscious. It is a time when the rational mind steps aside and a different kind of thinking takes over. Dreams are the language of the subconscious, a way for our minds to process emotions, memories, and anxieties in a symbolic, non-linear way. As you fall asleep, you are giving your mind the space it needs to do this important work. You are trusting your subconscious to sort through the day's experiences and prepare you for a new start tomorrow. It is a necessary and deeply healing process. The Egyptian attitude towards body hair was one of general disapproval. For reasons of cleanliness and a desire for a smooth, pure appearance, both men and women would remove most of their body hair. They used a variety of methods, including shaving with bronze razors and a form of waxing or sugaring, using a sticky mixture of honey and other ingredients. A smooth, hairless body was considered civilized and pure, while a hairy body was associated with uncivilized foreigners or primitive peoples. This was another aspect of their pursuit of an idealized, orderly, and refined physical form. The small number of casualties in the Great Emu War, both human and avian, is one of its most charming features. Despite the deployment of machine guns, there were no human injuries reported, apart from perhaps a bruised ego or two. And while several thousand emus were killed over the various campaigns, the overall population remained healthy. It was a war with no real victims, which allows us to view it with a sense of detached amusement. It was all sound and fury, signifying very little. It was a conflict in name only, a brief, strange, and ultimately harmless clash between man and nature. The ideal body type, for both men and women, was slender and youthful. Art depicts people with narrow hips, high waists, and long, graceful limbs. This ideal was a reflection of youth, vitality, and health. The cost of running Uraniborg was astronomical. It is estimated that at its height, the observatory consumed over 1% of the entire Danish crown's annual revenue. This was a staggering investment in a single scientific project. It reflects the immense value that King Frederick II placed on science, prestige, and perhaps on the astrological predictions that Tycho provided him. This level of funding was unsustainable, which is why the project collapsed so quickly after the king's death. Uraniborg was a magnificent but fragile bubble of scientific patronage, a brief golden age made possible by the unique combination of a brilliant scientist and an unusually enlightened and wealthy monarch. The coffee served in the first European coffeehouses was often met with mixed reactions. It was a completely new taste sensation. Some found it invigorating and delicious. Others described it as a sooty-tasting drink that looked like syrup of soot or essence of old shoes. It took time for the European palate to adjust to the bitterness of coffee. The addition of sugar, a luxury good that was becoming more widely available, helped to make it more palatable. The story of coffee's acceptance is a story of acquired taste, of a new and challenging flavor slowly winning over a continent. As you lie here, on the very brink of sleep, let your body be still. Let your mind be quiet. There is a deep peace in this stillness. It is a state of pure being, free from the demands of doing. In this stillness, your body can begin its nightly work of repair and restoration. Your mind can begin to untangle the knots of the day. All you have to do is allow this stillness to deepen. Allow the quiet to become more profound. Allow yourself to be completely at rest, held safely in the gentle embrace of the night. The Egyptian focus on symmetry in their art and makeup is another reflection of their love for ma'at, or divine order. The perfectly mirrored kohl-lined eyes, the balanced composition of their statues, the symmetrical layout of their temples, all of these were attempts to create a perfect, harmonious order that mirrored the perceived order of the cosmos. Asymmetry and chaos were associated with isfet, the opposite of ma'at, the force of disorder and evil. To be beautiful and to create beautiful things was to fight against chaos and to uphold the fundamental order of the universe. It was an ethical and aesthetic imperative. The official report on the First Emu War, submitted by Major Meredith, is a masterpiece of understated military frustration. He speaks of the emus' remarkable ability to carry wounds and their unpredictable movements. He concludes that the operation had been of no value, and that the emus were not an easy mark. Reading between the lines, one can sense his deep exasperation. He had been given an impossible task, and he knew it. The report is his attempt to justify his failure to his superiors, to explain that the enemy was simply too unconventional, too resilient, too emu-like, to be defeated by conventional means. Tycho Brahe's silver and gold nose was not just a medical prosthesis. It was a fashion statement. It was a way of turning a disfigurement into a mark of distinction. In an age of flamboyant personalities, his metal nose made him instantly recognizable and memorable. It became part of his personal brand, a symbol of his unique and eccentric genius. It was a way of saying, I am a man who lost his nose in a duel over mathematics, and had a better one made. It was a story he wore on his face, a testament to his pride, his wealth, and his refusal to be diminished by misfortune. The coffee house was a key part of the public sphere, a concept developed by the philosopher Jürgen Habermas. He argued that the coffee houses of the 18th century were one of the first places where private individuals could come together to form a public and engage in critical debate about matters of state. This public sphere, independent of both the government and the church, was a crucial development for modern democracy. It created a space where public opinion could be formed and articulated, placing a new check on the power of absolute rulers. The humble coffee house was, in this sense, a cradle of democracy. Your bed is an island. It is your own personal heaven, your own safe harbor in the vast ocean of the night. Within its boundaries, you are the ruler. You can arrange the pillows and blankets to your exact liking. You can find the perfect position for rest. This small act of creating a comfortable, personal space is a powerful ritual. It is a way of claiming a small piece of the world and making it your own, a sanctuary where you can feel completely secure and at ease. Cherish this small personal kingdom you have created for yourself as you drift off to sleep. Let's consider the ephemeral nature of Egyptian beauty. The oils, the perfumes, the makeup, all of it was temporary and had to be reapplied daily. But the goal was to create an image of permanence, an eternal, unchanging ideal of beauty. This paradox is at the heart of their aesthetic. They used the most fleeting of materials to gesture toward the eternal. The daily ritual of self-creation was a way of reaffirming their commitment to the divine order, of holding back the forces of chaos and decay for one more day. It was a constant, active process of maintaining beauty in the face of time. One of the enduring ironies of the Great Emu War is that the emu is now a national symbol of Australia, featured on the country's coat of arms alongside the kangaroo. These two animals were chosen because they are two of the few large animals that cannot easily move backward, and are thus seen as a symbol of progress and a nation moving forward. It's a wonderful bit of historical poetry that one of the nation's official symbols is the very same creature that once defeated its army in a bizarre and humiliating war. The emu, it seems, got the last laugh. Your clothing is simple, a perfect contrast to the elaborate hair and makeup. A sheath of fine, white linen allows your skin to breathe in the heat. Its simplicity allows your carefully applied cosmetics and jewelry to truly stand out. The sheer volume of Tycho Brahe's data is hard to comprehend. For 20 years, he and his team made thousands of observations, recording the positions of over 1,000 stars and the detailed movements of the planets. This was all done without telescopes, without computers, and without any of the modern tools of astronomy. It was a monumental feat of human patience and dedication. When Kepler finally inherited this treasure trove, he knew he was holding the key to the cosmos. He called Tycho's data a heap of dung, from which he had to pull the precious gold. But he knew that without that dung heap, there would be no gold to find. The coffee house was often a noisy and chaotic place, but it operated on an implicit code of conduct. You were expected to be civil, to engage in rational debate, and to respect the opinions of others, even if you disagreed. Fights and loud arguments were discouraged. This created an atmosphere of serious civility, where important topics could be discussed without descending into chaos. This culture of polite, rational discourse was essential to the coffeehouse's role as a center of the Enlightenment. It was a training ground for the kind of reasoned debate that is the lifeblood of a functioning democracy. The state between wakefulness and sleep is called hypnagogia. It's a creative, dreamlike state where you might experience strange images, sounds, or sensations. Thoughts become fluid and associative. It's a natural and important part of the process of falling asleep. If you find your mind drifting in this strange, creative way, don't fight it. It's a sign that you are on the right path. Allow the rational, linear part of your mind to recede, and let the more poetic, associative part take over. It is the gateway to the world of dreams. The Egyptian reverence for cats is well known, and it was also connected to their ideas of beauty and divinity. The cat was associated with the goddess Bastet, a protector of the home, and a goddess of fertility and childbirth, who was often depicted with the head of a cat. Cats were admired for their grace, their cleanliness, and their mysterious, watchful eyes. It is no coincidence that the Egyptians, who so valued these qualities, also lined their own eyes in a way that mimicked the feline form. To look like a cat was to invoke the protection and the graceful power of a sacred animal. The story of the Emu War is a perfect example of a black swan event, a term for a rare, unpredictable event with major consequences. No one in the Australian government in 1932 could have predicted that a pest culling operation would turn into a national embarrassment and a lasting historical joke. It was a failure of imagination. They saw the problem through a conventional military lens and were completely unprepared for the unconventional reality of the situation. It's a humble reminder that the world is full of surprises, and that even the most well-laid plans can be undone by a flock of very determined, very stupid birds. The location of Uraniborg on the island of Havan was chosen for its clear, dark skies, far from the city lights of Copenhagen. It was a perfect natural laboratory for astronomy, but it was also a place of isolation. Tycho and his team were cut off from the daily life of the mainland. This isolation probably contributed to the strange, self-contained culture that developed on the island. It was a world unto itself, with its own rules, its own rituals, and its own eccentric ruler. This isolation was both a strength, allowing for focused, uninterrupted work, and a weakness, fostering an arrogance and a detachment that would eventually lead to Tycho's downfall. The coffee house was a great social leveler, but it was also a place of social sorting. People naturally gravitated towards coffee houses, where they would find like-minded individuals. The scientists went to one, the merchants to another, the writers to a third. This created a network of specialized filter bubbles, where people could dive deep into their specific areas of interest. This was incredibly efficient for the exchange of specialized information, but it also laid the groundwork for the social fragmentation that we see in our own media landscape today. The coffee house was both a public square and a collection of private clubs. Let the final anchor for your mind be the sensation of your own heartbeat. You don't need to feel for it with your hand. Just bring your awareness to your chest. You might feel a faint, steady pulse. This is the rhythm of your life, the quiet engine that powers you. It has been with you every moment of your existence. It is a deeply comforting, deeply familiar rhythm. Let your mind rest on this steady beat. Let it be a lullaby, a quiet, internal drum that gently leads you into the profound peace of deep sleep. The Egyptian obsession with order extended to the tomb itself. The careful arrangement of grave goods, the precise alignment of the sarcophagus, the orderly procession of figures in the tomb paintings, all of it was designed to create a perfect, harmonious environment for the deceased to inhabit for eternity. The tomb was a microcosm of the ordered universe, a safe and stable bubble of ma'at that would protect the soul from the chaos of the underworld. It was the ultimate expression of their belief that order, beauty, and survival were all inextricably linked. A well-ordered tomb was a well-ordered afterlife. The machine guns used in the Emu War were Lewis guns, a British design that had been a workhorse of the First World War. They were reliable and effective weapons, capable of firing over 500 rounds per minute. The sheer overkill of using such a weapon against a flock of birds is part of what makes the story so absurd. It was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The technology was far too powerful and far too indiscriminate for the task at hand. The result was a massive expenditure of ammunition for very little effect. A perfect illustration of the law of diminishing returns. And oh, the jewelry. Heavy necklaces called broad collars, made of gold and faience beads in vibrant blues and greens, bracelets on your wrists and ankles, rings on your fingers. This is where wealth was truly displayed. Tycho Brahe's observational data was so accurate that it remained the best in the world for over 100 years, until the widespread use of telescopes with micrometers. He achieved this accuracy through two key innovations: the large size of his instruments, which allowed for finer gradations on the scales, and his practice of repeating observations and averaging the results to cancel out errors. He was a pioneer of statistical analysis and error correction. This obsessive attention to detail was not glamorous, but it was revolutionary. It transformed astronomy from a qualitative, philosophical pursuit into a quantitative, data-driven science. The decline of the first great age of coffeehouses was partly due to their own success. The ideas and social changes they fostered, the rise of a free press, the growth of a literate middle class, the development of new forms of commerce, eventually created a world where the coffeehouse was no longer the essential hub it once was. New institutions and technologies arose to fulfill its functions more efficiently. The coffeehouse was a victim of the very modernity it helped to create. It was a revolutionary institution that, by succeeding, made itself obsolete. There is a deep wisdom in the body's desire for sleep. It is not a weakness or a failing. It is a fundamental need. When you feel the pull of sleepiness, it is your body communicating a simple and profound truth. It is time to rest. Honoring that signal is an act of listening to your own deepest needs. As you feel that pull now, don't fight it. Welcome it. It is the sign that your body is ready to begin the healing and restorative work of the night. It is a gentle invitation to a state of profound peace. Accept the invitation. The Egyptian color palette for cosmetics was quite limited, primarily black, green, and red from ochre. But these colors were used with incredible artistry and variation. The shape and thickness of the kohl line could change with fashion. The placement of the green eyeshadow could vary. This limited palette forced a kind of creativity, a focus on line, shape, and form, rather than on a rainbow of colors. It resulted in a look that was stylized, graphic, and instantly recognizable, a powerful and enduring aesthetic that has captivated the world for millennia. The emu's success in the war can be attributed to their perfect adaptation to their environment. They are tall, which gives them a good vantage point to spot danger from afar. They have powerful legs that allow them to run at speeds up to 30 miles per hour. Their loose, shaggy feathers provide excellent camouflage in the scrubland, and their erratic running patterns make them incredibly difficult targets. They are a product of millions of years of evolution in a harsh and unpredictable landscape. The Australian Army in 1932 learned a swift and humbling lesson in evolutionary biology. Let's consider the sky over Uranoborg. In the 16th century, before industrial pollution and widespread electric light, the night sky would have been a breathtaking spectacle. The Milky Way would have stretched across the sky like a luminous river. The planets would have shone with a brilliant, steady light. It was a sky that was both beautiful and terrifying, a vast and mysterious realm that demanded explanation. Tycho Brahe's life's work was an attempt to impose human order on that sublime and overwhelming vista, to capture its wild beauty in the neat columns of his ledger books. The coffee house was a place where you could be both anonymous and connected. You could sit quietly and observe, a stranger in the crowd. Or you could strike up a conversation with the person next to you and engage in a lively debate. This unique blend of anonymity and sociability was part of its appeal. It allowed people to step outside their usual social roles and interact in a more free and uninhibited way. It was a temporary escape from the rigid structures of everyday life, a place to simply be a curious and engaged mind among other minds. If you are still awake, do not be concerned. The goal is not to force sleep, but to create the conditions for it. The stories, the calm tone, the gentle rhythm, all of these are simply tools to help quiet your mind. If your mind is quiet, then you are already in a state of rest, and sleep will come when it is ready. There is no need to strive for it. Simply continue to rest in the quiet darkness. Let go of the expectation of sleep, and you may find that it arrives more easily. The key is to release the effort and simply be. The idealized bodies in Egyptian art also served a magical function. In the tomb, these images were meant to magically provide the deceased with a perfect, healthy, and eternally youthful body in the afterlife. If a person had a physical infirmity in life, their tomb statue would show them as whole and perfect. It was a form of magical healing, an attempt to use art to create a perfect reality for the soul. The beauty standard was not just an aesthetic preference. It was a form of resurrection technology. The Great Emu War is a story that has only gotten better with time. In the immediate aftermath, it was likely just a source of frustration for the farmers and embarrassment for the government. But as the event receded into the past, its absurdity and humor came to the forefront. It has been polished by countless retellings, becoming a smoother, funnier, and more mythic story. It's a fine example of how history is not just what happened, but what we choose to remember and how we choose to tell the story. We have chosen to remember this story as a comedy, and that is a gift. These beauty standards were remarkably egalitarian. Men were just as likely as women to wear kohl, wigs, and jewelry. The goal for everyone was to present a clean, orderly, and idealized version of themselves to the world. The world of Tycho Brahe was one where the lines between science, magic, and religion were blurry. He was a devout Lutheran who cast horoscopes for the king. He was a meticulous astronomer who practiced alchemy. This can seem contradictory to our modern minds, which like to place subjects in neat, separate boxes. But for a Renaissance thinker, these were all just different ways of trying to read the book of God's works. The universe was a single, unified creation, and understanding it required a holistic approach that embraced both mathematical measurement and mystical insight. The culture of tipping is said to have its origins in the London coffee houses. Patrons who wanted to ensure prompt service would drop a coin into a box labeled "to ensure promptitude." This was later shortened to the acronym TIP. While the exact etymology is debated, the coffee house was certainly a place where new social and economic customs were being forged in the heat of daily interaction. The simple act of paying for a service, of navigating the social space, required the invention of new rules and new rituals, many of which have stayed with us to this day. Allow your mind to become like a calm, still lake. Thoughts may arise, like ripples on the surface, but you don't have to follow them. Just let them appear and then fade away, leaving the surface of the lake calm and clear once more. The deeper waters of the lake are profoundly still and quiet. Allow your awareness to sink into that deep, silent place within you. It is a place of profound peace, a reservoir of tranquility that is always available to you. Rest in that deep inner silence. The Egyptian emphasis on cleanliness was not just about aesthetics or hygiene, it was about ritual purity. Before entering a temple or engaging in a religious ceremony, a person had to be ritually clean. This often involved washing and putting on fresh, clean linen clothing. An impure body was not fit to enter a sacred space or to approach the gods. So, the daily practice of bathing and grooming was a way of maintaining a constant state of readiness for divine encounter. It was a way of living a life that was worthy of the gods' attention. The farmers of Western Australia eventually got their fence, but the emus, being clever birds, often found ways to get through or around it. The conflict between farmers and emus in Australia continues to this day, albeit in a less dramatic fashion. The Great Emu War was not a final, decisive battle, but simply the most memorable chapter in a long and ongoing story of human-wildlife conflict. It's a reminder that our relationship with the natural world is not a problem to be solved once and for all, but a constant, dynamic negotiation. Tycho Brahe's prosthetic nose was held on with a special paste or glue. One can only imagine the practical difficulties of this. What happened on a hot day? Or if he sneezed? It's a small, humanizing detail that brings this giant of science down to earth. For all his intellectual achievements, he still had to deal with the mundane and slightly comical problem of keeping his nose from falling off. It's a reminder that even the greatest figures in history had to navigate the small, everyday indignities of being human. The coffee house was a place of intellectual ferment, but it was also a business. The owners, or coffee men, were entrepreneurs who had to manage their inventory, attract customers, and maintain a certain atmosphere. They were the gatekeepers and facilitators of this new public sphere. A good coffee man knew how to create a welcoming environment, how to handle difficult customers, and how to make sure the flow of conversation and coffee never stopped. They were the unsung heroes of the Enlightenment, the small business owners who provided the infrastructure for a revolution in thought. The boundary between your body and the bed may start to feel blurry. The feeling of the blankets may merge with the feeling of your own skin. This is a good sign. It means you are relaxing deeply and letting go of the sharp distinctions of the waking world. Allow this feeling of merging, of dissolving, to continue. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are drifting in a warm, gentle sea of relaxation. Let the waves of sleep carry you away. The simplicity of Egyptian clothing, the white linen kilt for men, the simple sheath dress for women, was a brilliant adaptation to the hot climate. Linen, made from the flax plant, is a light, breathable fabric that wicks moisture away from the skin. The white color reflects the harsh desert sun. This simple, practical attire formed a perfect, neutral canvas for the elaborate cosmetics and heavy, colorful jewelry that were the real focus of their fashion. It was a masterclass in functional, elegant design. The emu is a deeply ancient bird, part of a family of flightless birds called ratites that have been around since the time of the dinosaurs. They have survived mass extinctions and dramatic climate change. They are, in a word, survivors. The Australian Army in 1932 was not just fighting a flock of birds. They were fighting a creature with 60 million years of evolutionary experience. Seen in that light, the outcome of the war seems less surprising and more inevitable. They were simply out of their league. So before you get comfortable, and I do hope you're getting very comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a quiet, no-pressure kind of support, and this wasn't just for life on Earth. Your tomb was filled with cosmetic palettes, jars of oils, and spare wigs, ensuring you could maintain your beauty routine in the afterlife, presenting your best self to the gods. The motto of Tycho Brahe was, "Non videri sed esse," which means not to seem, but to be. This is a fascinating choice for a man who was so concerned with his public image and who wore a prosthetic nose. It suggests an inner conflict between his desire for genuine scientific understanding and his need for worldly recognition. He wanted to be a man of substance, not just appearance. And in the end, he was. His substance, the mountain of data he collected, outlived his flamboyant appearance and secured his place in history. The coffee house was a place of endless novelty, new pamphlets, new ideas, new people. This constant stream of newness was highly stimulating and perhaps even addictive. It created a culture that valued what was current, what was fashionable, what was on the cutting edge. This obsession with the new is a hallmark of modernity, and the coffee house was one of its first engines. It was a place that taught people to be curious, to be open to change, and to constantly seek out the latest news and the most innovative ideas. You are now very deep in a state of relaxation. Your breathing is slow and regular. Your body is heavy and still. Your mind is quiet and calm. This is a precious and healing state. There is nothing more to hear, nothing more to do. The only journey left is the short, gentle slide into sleep. Let it happen naturally. Let the last bits of awareness fade like a dying star, leaving only the peaceful, restorative darkness of a dreamless sleep. The Egyptian use of mirrors, those polished discs of bronze or copper, was also imbued with meaning. The mirror was a symbol of the sun, and it was associated with the goddess Hathor. It was believed to have magical properties, to be able to reveal the truth and to ward off evil. Looking into one's reflection was not just an act of vanity. It was a sacred act, a moment of self-contemplation in a divinely charged object. The tools of beauty were also tools of the spirit. The Great Emu War serves as a perfect cautionary tale against hubris. The Australian military went into the conflict with a supreme sense of confidence. They had modern weapons and military training. The emus had nothing. The expected outcome was a swift and total victory. The actual outcome was a complete reversal of those expectations. It's a powerful reminder that overconfidence can be a fatal flaw, and that it's wise to never underestimate your opponent, even if that opponent is a large, flightless bird. Humility, the story suggests, is a valuable strategic asset. The scientific community on the island of Havven was truly international. Tycho Brahe invited scholars and assistants from all over Europe to come and work with him. It was a cosmopolitan hub of knowledge, where ideas from Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands could mix with Danish ingenuity. This international collaboration was essential to the success of the project. It created a dynamic intellectual environment and ensured that the work done on Havven was part of a larger European conversation. Science, Tycho understood, thrives on the open exchange of ideas across borders. The coffee house democratized conversation, but not everyone was happy about it. Some members of the upper class complained that the coffee houses allowed common people to meddle in political matters that were above their station. They lamented that every cobbler and tailor now considered himself a statesman. This complaint reveals the revolutionary nature of the coffee house. It was a threat to the old order, where political discourse was the exclusive property of the elite. The coffee house was a noisy, messy, and wonderfully disruptive force in the history of democracy. Your mind is now like a sky at dusk. The bright, sharp thoughts of the day have faded, and the colors are becoming soft and muted. Soon, the stars will come out, the strange, gentle images of your dreams. This is a beautiful and peaceful time. There is no need to rush it. Just enjoy this quiet transition, this slow and gentle fading of the light. The darkness that follows is not an ending, but a new beginning, a time of deep rest and renewal. In Egyptian art, men are often depicted with a reddish-brown skin tone, while women are shown with a lighter, yellowish-white skin. This was not a reflection of reality, but an artistic convention. The reddish-brown color was associated with the sun and outdoor labor, considered appropriate for men. The lighter color was associated with the home, and a more sheltered, domestic life, considered the ideal for elite women. It was a way of using color to instantly communicate the gender and social role of the figure, another layer of order and symbolism in their art. The humor of the Emu War lies in the profound mismatch between the tool and the task. A machine gun is a tool of industrial-scale warfare, designed for efficiency and lethality against a specific type of target, a human army. Using it against a flock of birds is like using a supercomputer to do simple arithmetic. It's a comical misapplication of power. The story is a parody of a military operation, where all the forms and procedures of war are present, but the substance is utterly absurd. It's a bureaucrat's solution to a farmer's problem, with predictably ridiculous results. Now let's leave the warm banks of the Nile and travel forward in time and far across the globe to a place altogether different. Let's drift to the sun-scorched plains of Western Australia in the year 1932. The world is in the grip of the Great Depression and life is hard. For a group of Australian veterans, it's about to get strange. These men had been given parcels of land after World War I, encouraged to become wheat farmers. It was a tough life, made tougher by the fact that their hard-earned crops were being systematically destroyed. The culprits weren't drought or blight, but an army. An army of 20,000 emus. These large, flightless birds, migrating after their breeding season, had discovered that farmed land was a fantastic, all-you-can-eat buffet. They were a formidable feathered plague. Tycho Brahe's relationship with his family was complex. He was disowned by his noble birth family after he chose to marry a commoner, a woman named Kirstine Jorgensdatter. This was a major breach of social protocol. But Tycho stood by his decision, and they had a long marriage and many children. This shows a side of him that was willing to defy convention for the sake of his personal life, a stark contrast to his often tyrannical public persona. He was a man who contained multitudes, capable of both great arrogance and great loyalty. The coffee house was a place of business, but it was also a place of leisure. The playing of games like chess and backgammon was a common pastime. The reading of poetry and the listening to music provided entertainment. This blend of work and play was part of what made the coffee house so appealing. It was a third place, a space that was neither the rigid world of work nor the private world of home. It was a more fluid, relaxed environment where different aspects of life could mingle, a place to be both productive and entertained. As you rest here, in the final moments before sleep, you are a part of the quiet of the universe. The same silence that exists between the stars is present in your room. The same deep peace that lies at the bottom of the ocean is available within you. There is no need to search for it. You just need to be still and let it find you. Let the great, peaceful quiet of the cosmos be your blanket, your comfort, as you drift into a deep and starless sleep. The importance of the name, or Ren, in Egyptian belief cannot be overstated. To know someone's name was to have power over them. For one's name to be remembered after death was essential for survival in the afterlife. This is why pharaohs carved their names in stone all over Egypt. If your name was obliterated, your existence was threatened. This belief adds another layer to their art and artifacts. The hieroglyphs that adorn them are not just decoration. They are a vital technology for ensuring the eternal existence of the person they name. Let's consider the Lewis gun itself. It was recognizable by its bulky barrel shroud and its top-mounted pan magazine. It was heavy, but it could be operated by a single soldier, which made it revolutionary for its time. In the trenches of World War I, it was a fearsome weapon. In the outback of Australia, it was just a very loud and inefficient way to scare birds. The gun's history is a story of context. A tool's value is not inherent. It is determined by the situation in which it is used. The mighty Lewis gun, a hero of the Western Front, was a failure in the Emu War. Tycho Brahe's alchemical experiments were not just about trying to turn lead into gold. He was deeply interested in iatrochemistry, the application of chemistry to medicine. He believed that he could create powerful new remedies by distilling the essences of plants and minerals. He set up a free apothecary at Uraniborg to provide medicines to the local islanders. While his theories were flawed, his work was part of a larger movement that would eventually lead to the development of modern pharmacology. Even his failures were pointing in a fruitful direction. The coffee house was a place of sobriety in another sense, too. The intellectual culture it fostered was one of critical thinking and skepticism. The constant flow of news and rumors taught patrons to be discerning consumers of information. They learned to question sources, to compare different accounts, and to look for evidence. This was a kind of mental sobriety, a refusal to be intoxicated by baseless claims or propaganda. It was a training ground for the kind of critical mindset that is essential for a free and informed society. Your breathing is now a soft, gentle wave, rising and falling. With each exhale, you can release a little more tension, a little more of the day. Let each breath be a small act of letting go. Let go of the need to think. Let go of the need to do. Let go of the need to be anything other than what you are right now. A person, at rest, in a quiet room, on the verge of a peaceful sleep. There is nothing else that matters. The sheer longevity of the ancient Egyptian civilization is a soothing thought. Their core culture, including their beauty standards, remained remarkably consistent for almost 3,000 years. In a world that seems to change so rapidly, there is a deep sense of peace in contemplating a society that possessed such stability and continuity. Theirs was a world built on the slow, predictable rhythms of the Nile and the eternal cycles of the sun. Their art and their ideals reflect this deep sense of permanence. The story of the Great Emu War is a story with a happy ending, at least for the emus. Their population in Australia today is stable and thriving. They successfully defended their territory and their right to eat wheat. They remain a powerful symbol of the resilience of nature and the wild, untamable spirit of the Australian continent. They are a living monument to one of the strangest and most wonderful failures in military history. The birds, in their own quiet, feathered way, are victorious. The farmers, being ex-soldiers, knew how to handle a rifle, but they were outmatched by the sheer number of birds. Desperate, they sent a deputation to the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce. Their request was unusual, to say the least. They didn't ask for financial aid or better farming equipment. They asked for machine guns, and, incredibly, the minister agreed. It seemed like a perfect solution. It would be good target practice for the gunners, a bit of patriotic pest control, and it would look like the government was doing something to help the struggling veterans. So Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery was dispatched to the front lines, armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The stage was set for what the press would gleefully dub the Great Emu War. The name of Tycho Brahe's observatory, Uraniborg, means Castle of Urania. Urania was the Greek muse of astronomy. By naming his observatory after her, Tycho was explicitly placing his work within the classical tradition of humanistic learning. He saw himself not just as a scientist, but as a Renaissance man, a scholar who was equally at home with ancient poetry and modern mathematics. He was building a temple to a muse, a sacred space dedicated to the celestial arts. The coffeehouse was a uniquely public institution. Unlike a private home or an exclusive club, it was open to anyone who could afford the price of a cup of coffee. This openness was its defining characteristic. It created a space where social boundaries could be temporarily suspended and where a new kind of collective identity, the public, could be formed. The simple act of creating a space where strangers could gather and talk was a profoundly radical and democratic innovation. The silence in your room is a gift. It is a space for your mind to unwind, for your nervous system to calm down. In our noisy world, true quiet is a rare luxury. So as you lie here, savor it. Let the silence be a soft blanket, wrapping you in a sense of peace and security. Let it wash over you, cleansing you of the noise of the day. Allow yourself to dissolve into this peaceful, healing silence. The legacy of Egyptian beauty is all around us. The cat-eye eyeliner, a staple of modern makeup, is a direct descendant of the kohl-lined eyes of Nefertiti. Our fascination with gold jewelry, our use of perfumes, our desire for smooth, youthful skin, all of these have echoes in the ancient world of the Nile. The Egyptians created a language of beauty so powerful that we are still speaking it, in some small way, thousands of years later. The Great Emu War is a story that reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously. It's a tale of human folly, of a grand plan gone comically wrong. It's a reminder that even the most powerful institutions can be humbled by the unexpected, and that sometimes the best response to failure is to simply have a good laugh. It's a story that deflates our sense of self-importance, and in that there is a kind of wisdom. The data from Uraniborg, the product of Tycho Brahe's life's work, now exists as numbers in a database, accessible to anyone with a computer. The meticulous observations made by candlelight on a remote Danish island are now part of our collective digital heritage. It's a testament to the power of information to transcend its physical origins. The castle may be gone, but the knowledge it produced is more accessible now than ever before. a quiet and enduring victory for the strange, brilliant man with the silver nose. And so, our final story tonight is the one your own body is telling you. It's a simple story, a tale of a day's end and a well-earned rest. It's a narrative written in the language of slowing heartbeats and gentle breaths. It doesn't have any characters or plot twists. Its only theme is peace. Let yourself be the main character in this quiet story. Let its gentle conclusion be a deep and dreamless sleep. There's nothing more to do now, nothing more to hear. Just rest. Good night. The first engagement took place on the 2nd of November 1932. Major Meredith and his men spotted a flock of about 50 emus. This was it, the moment of truth. They set up the machine gun, took careful aim, and waited for the birds to get into range. The local settlers, meanwhile, tried to herd the emus into a neat, tidy group, a perfect target. But emus, it turns out, don't really do neat and tidy. The birds, sensing something was amiss, scattered in all directions. The gunner opened fire, but the targets were moving too quickly. After a great expenditure of ammunition, the official report stated a number of birds were killed. Unofficially, it might have been a dozen. The emus had won the first battle through sheer, unpredictable chaos. A few days later, the soldiers planned a more sophisticated ambush. They'd located a flock of over 1,000 emus near a local dam. This time, they would be ready. They set up the gun in a concealed position and waited. As the huge flock approached, the order was given to open fire. The Lewis gun rattled, spitting out bullets. For a moment, it seemed to be working. And then, the gun jammed. By the time they cleared the stoppage, the 1,000-strong emu platoon had vanished over the horizon, leaving behind only about 12 of their fallen comrades. The emus, it seemed, had superior tactics. They would split into small, leaderless groups, making it impossible to target them effectively. As Major Meredith noted in his report, if we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. The campaign continued in this fashion for about a week. The military would expend vast quantities of ammunition for a laughably small number of casualties. The press was having a field day, with one newspaper columnist noting that the emus were employing guerrilla tactics. The soldiers tried mounting a Lewis gun on the back of a truck, hoping to keep up with the surprisingly fast birds. This led to a comical chase across the bumpy terrain, with the gunner unable to get a clear shot. The truck couldn't gain on the birds, and the whole affair ended when the truck crashed through a farmer's fence. No emus were harmed in this particular debacle. The war was becoming a national embarrassment. After nearly a month of this frustrating, feathered conflict, the military command in Perth decided to pull the plug. The operation was a failure. The official figures were 986 emus killed with 860 rounds of ammunition. That's a staggering 10 bullets for every confirmed kill. And those were just the confirmed ones. Many more were wounded and escaped. Major Meredith and his men withdrew, defeated. The emus presumably celebrated their victory with another feast of Australian wheat. The farmers were, of course, still furious. The birds were still there, and now the army was gone. The war may have been over for the military, but the farmers' struggle continued. The story, however, doesn't quite end there. The farmers, still plagued by the birds, requested military assistance again just a few months later. The government, wary of another public relations disaster, was hesitant. But the combination of a hot summer and a continuing drought brought the emus back in even greater numbers. The Premier of Western Australia himself supported the farmers' pleas, and so the army was sent back in for round 2. The Emu War, the sequel, was a bit more successful, statistically speaking. They managed to kill just under 1,000 emus over a few months. But the problem was far from solved. The birds were simply too numerous, too resilient. Ultimately, the most effective solution came not from machine guns, but from something far more mundane: better fences. The government instituted a bounty system, which proved more cost-effective and successful in the long run. Over a 6-month period in 1934, over 57,000 bounties were claimed. The Great Emu War stands as a strange and wonderful footnote in military history, a testament to nature's ability to confound human plans. It's a story about underestimating your opponent, and a reminder that sometimes the most sophisticated solution isn't the right one. It's the story of how Australia went to war with a bird, and the bird, for all intents and purposes, won. Now, let's leave the dusty plains of Australia and travel back to a different time and place, to an island in the Danish Straits during the late 16th century. Here, we meet a man who is, in many ways, the absolute opposite of a chaotic emu, a man of meticulous order, lavish expense, and towering intellect. His name is Tycho Brahe, and he is perhaps the most interesting astronomer you've never heard of. He was a Danish nobleman, born into a world of castles and privilege, but his passion wasn't for politics or war, it was for the stars. And his life was every bit as dramatic and eccentric as his groundbreaking work. He's a man who changed our understanding of the cosmos, all while sporting a prosthetic nose and keeping a drunken moose as a pet. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. I love seeing our little community of quiet history lovers stretch all across the globe. It's a nice thought as we all settle in. Tycho's journey into a life of scientific obsession began, as these things often do, with a dramatic event. As a young man, a student of law at the University of Copenhagen, he witnessed a solar eclipse. He was astounded not by the event itself, but by the fact that it had been predicted. The idea that human beings could foresee the movements of the heavens lit a fire in his mind. He knew, right then, that this was his calling. He began to study astronomy in secret, spending his allowance not on clothes or parties, but on astronomical books and instruments, often hiding them from his disapproving uncle and guardian. This was the start of a lifelong dedication to a single, all-consuming purpose: to map the heavens with an accuracy never before achieved. But before he could truly map the heavens, a rather earthly dispute would permanently alter his own map. At the age of 20, while studying in Germany, he got into a heated argument with another Danish nobleman. The subject of their dispute is lost to history, but popular legend holds that it was over who was the better mathematician. Because this was the 16th century, and they were hot-headed young nobles, they decided to settle the matter with a duel. In the darkness of a December evening, swords were drawn, and in the ensuing fight, Tycho had the bridge of his nose sliced clean off. This unfortunate event would come to define his physical appearance for the rest of his life, and contribute greatly to his larger-than-life persona. Undeterred, Tycho simply had a new nose made, or rather several of them. For everyday use, he had a prosthetic nose crafted from brass. For special occasions, he had a more luxurious version made of silver and gold. He would carry a small pot of glue or paste with him at all times to keep it attached. The image of this brilliant astronomer, pausing his celestial observations to reapply his metal nose, is a perfect encapsulation of his unique character. He was a man of supreme intellect and dedication, but also one who lived with the consequences of a very human, very foolish moment of pride. It's a humbling detail in an otherwise towering biography. Tycho's big break came in 1572. A new star, brighter than Venus, suddenly appeared in the constellation Cassiopeia. This was a bombshell for the scientific and religious thought of the time. The heavens were supposed to be perfect, eternal and unchanging, a divine creation. The appearance of a new star, what we now know was a supernova, shattered that idea. While others offered mystical explanations, Tycho meticulously observed it. He used his instruments to prove that it was not an atmospheric phenomenon, but was located far beyond the moon, in the realm of the fixed stars. His subsequent book on the subject made him famous throughout Europe. The King of Denmark, Frederick II, was so impressed by Tycho's work that he made him an offer he couldn't refuse. He gave Tycho the entire island of Fun, located between Denmark and Sweden, along with a massive pension and the funding to build the greatest astronomical observatory the world had ever seen. It was an unprecedented act of royal patronage for science. Tycho, a man who never did anything by halves, seized the opportunity. He built not just an observatory, but a veritable palace of science, which he named Uraniborg, or Castle of the Heavens. It was a stunning piece of Renaissance architecture, complete with onion domes, formal gardens, and its own printing press and alchemy laboratory in the basement. Uraniborg was less an observatory and more a scientific research institute, the first of its kind. Tycho designed and built his own enormous astronomical instruments, great quadrants, and armillary spheres made of wood and brass. These were not telescopes. The telescope hadn't been invented yet, but sophisticated sighting devices. With these, he and his team of assistants began a relentless 20-year program of observing the positions of the stars and planets every single night. The sheer volume and, more importantly, the accuracy of his data were orders of magnitude better than anything that had come before. He was creating the raw material that would fuel the next great revolution in astronomy. Life on the island of heaven was, by all accounts, bizarre. Tycho ruled it like his own personal kingdom. He was a demanding and often tyrannical landlord to the local islanders. He hosted lavish banquets for visiting scholars and nobles, where he would be entertained by his court jester, a dwarf named Jep, who Tycho believed was clairvoyant, and would sit under the table during dinner, chattering away. It was at one of these banquets that another famous member of Tycho's eccentric household met his end. Tycho owned a pet moose, which was apparently quite tame, and would follow him around like a dog. Unfortunately, during a visit to a nobleman's castle, the moose was allowed to drink a large quantity of beer, became intoxicated, fell down a flight of stairs, and died. Tycho's own cosmological model was a strange compromise. He couldn't bring himself to accept the Copernican idea that the Earth moved, as it seemed to contradict both common sense and scripture. But he knew the old Ptolemaic system, with the Earth at the center of everything, was flawed. So he proposed his own Tychonic system. In his model, the Sun and Moon orbited the Earth, but all the other planets orbited the Sun. It was an ingenious, if ultimately incorrect, hybrid model that preserved a stationary Earth while still accounting for his precise observations. It was a perfect reflection of a man caught between the old world and the new, a brilliant observer who couldn't quite make the final leap of imagination. After his patron, King Frederick II, died, Tycho's fortunes changed. The new king, Christian IV, was less interested in funding a hugely expensive and famously arrogant astronomer on a private island. His funding was cut, and after a series of disputes, Tycho packed up his instruments, his family, and his data and left Denmark for good. He eventually found a new patron in the Holy Roman Emperor, Rudolf II, in Prague. It was here, in the final years of his life, that he would hire a young, brilliant, and deeply troubled assistant, a German mathematician named Johannes Kepler. This would prove to be the most important collaboration in the history of astronomy. The relationship between Tycho and Kepler was fraught with tension. Tycho, the great observer, had the data, the best data in the world. Kepler, the great theorist, had the mathematical genius to understand what it meant. But Tycho guarded his data jealously. He gave Kepler only small bits of it at a time, specifically the data on the orbit of Mars, which was proving particularly difficult to model. For months, Kepler struggled with it, trying to make it fit a perfect circular orbit, as everyone since the ancient Greeks had assumed orbits must be. But Tycho's precise data just wouldn't fit. The numbers were off, just by a tiny amount, but an amount too large for Tycho's meticulous observations to be wrong. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some white noise, and get into that perfect position. Let your muscles unwind. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, starting on the banks of the Nile. Then, in 1601, Tycho Brahe died suddenly. The circumstances of his death are as strange as his life. The story, long told, is that he was attending a banquet and, out of politeness, refused to leave the table to relieve himself. The strain on his bladder was so great that it led to an infection that killed him. His own reported last words were, "Let me not seem to have lived in vain." For centuries, this was accepted as a cautionary tale about the dangers of extreme courtly etiquette. However, modern examinations of his remains have suggested a different, more sinister possibility: mercury poisoning. Whether it was accidental, from his own alchemical experiments, or something more deliberate, remains a subject of debate. With Tycho gone, Kepler finally got his hands on the complete set of astronomical data. It was the scientific inheritance of a lifetime. Armed with Tycho's peerless observations of Mars, Kepler was able to throw off the 2,000-year-old assumption of circular orbits and discover his 3 laws of planetary motion. He proved that planets move not in circles, but in ellipses. It was a monumental breakthrough, and it would have been impossible without the decades of painstaking work by the strange, brilliant, brass-nosed nobleman. Tycho Brahe did not, in the end, live in vain. He built the bridge from the old cosmos to the new, and it was his assistant Kepler who was the first to cross it. Let's now leave the castles of 16th century Europe and journey to a different kind of institution, one that would fuel a very different kind of revolution. Let's travel to the bustling, aromatic, and intellectually charged world of the coffeehouse. It's a place that smells of roasted beans, sweet smoke, and ink. A place where news is traded, fortunes are made, and new ideas can change the world. The story of the coffeehouse is the story of how a bitter black drink from a distant land helped to create the modern world, one conversation at a time. It's a story that begins, as so many good stories do, with a legend about some unusually energetic goats. The legend takes us to the highlands of Ethiopia, sometime around the 9th century. A goat herder named Kaldi noticed that his goats, after nibbling on the bright red berries of a particular shrub, became so energetic that they danced. They refused to sleep at night. Kaldi, intrigued, tried the berries himself and felt a similar jolt of vitality. He brought his discovery to a local monastery, where the abbot, initially disapproving, threw the beans into a fire. But as they roasted, they released a wonderful aroma. The monks raked them from the embers, ground them up, and dissolved them in hot water, creating the world's first cup of coffee. They found it helped them stay awake during their long hours of evening prayer, and its fame began to spread. From Ethiopia, the coffee bean traveled across the Red Sea to Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula. By the 15th century, it was being cultivated and traded widely. It was in the great cities of the Middle East, in Mecca, Cairo, and Damascus, that the first real coffee houses known as kave-khane emerged. These were revolutionary spaces. They were public venues where men could gather for conversation, listen to music, play chess, and, of course, drink coffee. They were a secular alternative to the mosque, a place for social and intellectual exchange. They became so popular, and such hotbeds of political discussion, that they were often viewed with suspicion by rulers, who periodically tried to ban them, but the public demand was always too great. These early coffee houses were dubbed schools of the wise because they were centers of learning and information. In an age before newspapers, they were the primary places to hear the latest news, gossip, and political rumors. Poets would recite their verses, scholars would debate, and merchants would make deals. The drink itself, sharp and stimulating, was believed to encourage clear thought and lively debate, a stark contrast to the intoxicating effects of alcohol, which was forbidden by Islam. The coffee house was a place of sobriety, intellect, and connection, a social innovation as important as the drink it served. Coffee made its way to Europe in the 17th century, brought by Venetian merchants trading with the Ottoman Empire. At first, it was viewed with deep suspicion. The Catholic clergy in Venice condemned it as the, quote, bitter invention of Satan, a devilish drink from the Muslim world. The controversy grew so great that Pope Clement VIII was asked to intervene. The story goes that he decided to taste the beverage for himself before making a judgment. He found it so delicious that he jokingly declared he would baptize it, making it an acceptable Christian beverage. With the Pope's blessing, coffee's popularity in Europe exploded, and coffee houses soon followed. The first coffee house in England opened in Oxford in 1650. It was an immediate hit with the students and academics of the university. But it was in London where the coffee house truly found its home and transformed society. The first one in London was opened in 1652 in St. Michael's Alley. Within a few decades, there were hundreds of them, each catering to a different clientele. There were coffee houses for merchants, for lawyers, for scientists, for poets, for politicians. They were the social media of their day, the hubs where information was exchanged and public opinion was formed. London coffee houses were famously egalitarian spaces. For the price of a penny, which bought you a cup of coffee, you could enter and join in the conversation. This earned them the nickname penny universities. A man's social status mattered less than the quality of his arguments and the wit of his conversation. In the coffee-fueled discussions at places like Will's Coffee House, literary giants like John Dryden and Alexander Pope held court. At the Grecian Coffee House, scientists and members of the Royal Society, like Isaac Newton, would meet to discuss their latest experiments and theories. These were crucibles of the Enlightenment. The business world was also forged in the heat and smoke of the coffee house. Merchants and ship captains gathered at a coffee house run by Edward Lloyd to trade information about ships, cargo, and weather. This informal gathering of underwriters and clients eventually grew into the world's leading insurance market, Lloyd's of London. Similarly, stockbrokers who were barred from the Royal Exchange for their rowdiness began meeting and trading shares in Jonathan's Coffee House, an institution that would evolve into the London Stock Exchange. Modern capitalism in many ways has the faint aroma of roasted coffee about it. Imagine for a moment that you are there. The air is warm and dry, smelling of river water and sun-baked earth. Your morning ritual doesn't begin with a splash of cold water, but with a careful, almost sacred preparation. Of course, not everyone was a fan. The government of King Charles II saw them as breeding grounds for political dissent and sedition, and in 1675, he issued a proclamation to shut them all down. The public outcry was so immediate and so fierce that he was forced to withdraw the order just 11 days later. Women, too, had their complaints. They were generally excluded from coffeehouse culture, and in 1674, a pamphlet called The Women's Petition Against Coffee was published. It humorously claimed that coffee made their husbands sterile and turned them into useless layabouts who would rather talk politics than attend to their domestic duties. The coffeehouse layout was designed to encourage interaction. They were typically large, open rooms filled with long wooden tables where strangers would sit side by side. Newspapers were provided for customers to read and debate. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the constant buzz of conversation. It was a dynamic, stimulating, and distinctly male environment. The rules of conduct were often posted on the wall, encouraging civil discourse and forbidding swearing and quarreling. It was a space designed for the mind, powered by a drink that sharpened it. The influence of the coffeehouse spread across Europe and to the American colonies. In Paris, cafes like the Procope became the meeting places for Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot. The ideas that would fuel the French Revolution were debated and refined over cups of café au lait. In Boston, the Green Dragon Tavern, which also served as a coffeehouse, was called the quote, headquarters of the Revolution by Daniel Webster. It was there that the Sons of Liberty met to plan the Boston Tea Party, a protest that, ironically, helped to cement coffee status as the patriotic American drink of choice over British tea. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the golden age of the London coffee house began to fade. The rise of exclusive gentlemen's clubs offered a more private and comfortable setting for the wealthy. The development of the postal service and the daily newspaper made the coffee house less essential as a source of news. But its legacy was secure. It had created a new kind of public space, fostered intellectual and commercial innovation, and helped to shape the democratic and capitalist world we live in. It democratized information and created a public sphere where ideas could be freely exchanged, a concept that is still fundamental to our society today. Every time we meet a friend for coffee, we are participating in a ritual with a deep and revolutionary history. And with that thought, let's allow our minds to drift away from the energetic buzz of the coffeehouse and back to a place of quiet contemplation. Let the stories of the night begin to blend together. The meticulous artistry of the Egyptians, the chaotic resilience of the emus, the eccentric genius of Tycho Brahe, and the revolutionary fervor of the coffee drinkers. They are all just currents in the great, slow-moving river of history. Each one a small reminder of the endless variety of human experience, of our triumphs, our follies, and our strange and wonderful obsessions. There is nothing more to do now but to let these currents carry you gently towards sleep. Let's return for a moment to the peculiar story of the Great Emu War and consider the perspective of the soldiers themselves. Imagine being Major Meredith, a decorated officer of the Royal Australian Artillery. You are trained in the science of ballistics, the art of commanding men in battle, of deploying firepower with maximum efficiency against a thinking, organized enemy. And then you are sent to the outback with one of the most effective infantry weapons of the First World War to fight, birds. The sheer absurdity must have been palpable. The official reports are written in dry, military language, but between the lines you can feel the immense frustration. Every carefully laid plan, every ambush, was thwarted not by strategy, but by the emus' complete lack of it. Think of the gunners. These men likely served in the trenches of France, operating the St. Louis gun against enemy positions. The staccato rattle of the gun was the sound of life and death. Now in the vast, quiet emptiness of the Australian bush, that same sound echoes, but the targets are lanky, feathered creatures that run in zigzags. The skills honed in the crucible of war are now being used for what amounts to agricultural pest control. It must have felt like a surreal, almost comical demotion. The enemy doesn't shoot back, but it also doesn't surrender, and it certainly doesn't adhere to any known military doctrine. The war was not against an army, but against a biological reality, and that's a war you can't win with bullets alone. The media's role in this affair added another layer of absurdity. Ornithologists and conservationists began to speak out, turning the emu into a sympathetic figure. One observer in a newspaper noted that the emu's command had clearly ordered guerrilla tactics. Cartoons appeared depicting emus in military uniforms, awarding medals to their bravest soldiers. The narrative shifted from a simple pest-culling operation to a David and Goliath story where the military, with all its modern technology, was being outsmarted by a flightless bird. This public mockery undoubtedly contributed to the government's decision to withdraw. The war was lost not just on the battlefield, but in the court of public opinion. The emus had better press. The aftermath for the farmers was a grim return to reality. The soldiers packed up their machine guns and went home, but the emus remained. The farmers' initial hope that the might of the Australian military could solve their problem had been dashed. It's a classic tale of seeking a complex, top-down solution for a problem that required a simpler, more practical one. The final answer wasn't military intervention, but civil engineering and economic incentive, fences and bounties. It's a quiet lesson in humility. Sometimes, the most powerful tool you have is entirely the wrong one for the job, and the solution lies in understanding the nature of the problem, not in the amount of force you can apply to it. Let's also drift back to the island of Oven and consider the sheer scale of Tycho Brahe's ambition. Uraniborg wasn't just a building, it was a statement. In a time when science was a gentleman's hobby, he turned it into a state-funded, industrial-scale enterprise. The castle itself was a masterpiece of Renaissance design, perfectly aligned with the cardinal directions. The gardens were not just for beauty, they were planted with medicinal herbs for his alchemical and medical research. He had workshops for building his instruments, a library, and even a prison for unruly tenants. He was attempting to create a perfect, self-contained universe of knowledge, with himself as its sun. Your mirror isn't glass, but a disc of highly polished bronze or copper, giving back a soft, warm, slightly distorted reflection of your face. It's a prized possession, an essential tool for the task ahead. And in the basement of this castle of the heavens was another, more secretive world, his alchemical laboratory. For Tycho, like many thinkers of his age, there was no sharp dividing line between astronomy and alchemy. He believed that the secrets of the heavens and the secrets of earthly matter were intertwined. He spent a great deal of time and money trying to discover the philosopher's stone and create elixirs to cure disease. This pursuit, which we now dismiss as pseudoscience, was, for him, part of the same grand project to understand God's creation. It's this side of his work that may have led to his death, as the handling of materials like mercury was a dangerous business. His quest for knowledge was all-encompassing, and ultimately, perhaps, all-consuming. Imagine the sounds of the island on a clear night, not silence, but the quiet, purposeful hum of science, the creak of the great wooden quadrants as they were moved into position. The low murmur of Tycho's voice as he called out observations to an assistant who would carefully record them by candlelight. The scratch of a quill pen in a ledger, capturing a tiny piece of the cosmos. For 20 years, this was the rhythm of life at Uraniborg. A relentless, nightly accumulation of data, done with a rigor and precision that was obsessive. It was profoundly boring work, in a way. Just numbers, night after night. But Tycho knew that within these numbers, within this mountain of meticulous data, the true shape of the universe was hidden. The departure of Tycho from his island paradise must have been a sorrowful affair. Imagine the dismantling of those enormous, custom-built instruments that had been his life's work. The packing of crates, filled with priceless books, and 20 years of observational logs. He was a man who had been given a kingdom and had, through his own arrogance and the changing political winds, lost it. His move to Prague was a second chance, but it was also an exile. He was an old man, his health failing, trying to re-establish his great scientific enterprise in a foreign land. The hiring of Kepler was an act of necessity, a recognition that he needed help to make sense of the vast ocean of data he had collected. The brief, intense relationship between Tycho and Kepler is one of history's great what-ifs. What if Tycho had lived longer? Would he have ever fully relinquished control of his data? Would he have ever accepted Kepler's revolutionary conclusions about elliptical orbits? It seems unlikely. Tycho was a man of the old world, a man who built his entire system on the idea of a stationary Earth and perfect celestial circles. It took Kepler, a man of a new generation, unburdened by Tycho's fame and ego, to look at the numbers with fresh eyes and see the radical truth they contained. Tycho's role was to provide the evidence. Kepler's was to be the jury that delivered the verdict, a verdict that would change astronomy forever. Let's now revisit the aromatic world of the 17th century coffeehouse and linger on the sensory details. The room would have been perpetually hazy with the smoke from clay pipes, mingling with the steam rising from the coffee pots. The coffee itself was not the filtered, smooth beverage we know today. It was thick, black, and gritty, often boiled with sugar and spices like cinnamon or cloves. It was served in small, handleless ceramic bowls. The taste was strong, bitter, and intense, a jolt to the senses that was mirrored by the intellectual energy of the room. It wasn't a drink for passive consumption. It was a drink that demanded your attention, much like the conversations happening all around you. Consider the role of the newspaper in this environment. Before coffee houses, news traveled slowly, by word of mouth or private letter. The coffee house, combined with the nascent printing press, created a new ecosystem for information. Runners would bring the latest pamphlets and news sheets directly to the coffee houses, where they would be read aloud to the assembled patrons, many of whom were illiterate. A single news sheet would be passed from table to table, debated and dissected. This was the birth of public opinion, the idea that the collective judgment of ordinary citizens mattered. A government could no longer operate in a vacuum. Its actions were now subject to immediate public scrutiny in hundreds of coffee houses across the city. The specialization of these establishments is a fascinating detail. If you were a Whig politician, you went to the St. James's Coffee House. If you were a Tory, you went to the Ozinda Chocolate House. If you were a scientist, it was the Grecian. A poet, Will's. A stock jobber, Jonathan's. These were not just places to drink coffee. They were offices, social clubs, and information exchanges rolled into one. A merchant could conduct almost all his business from his favorite coffee house, using it as a mailing address and a meeting place. This network of specialized hubs made London the commercial and intellectual capital of the world, a city that ran on caffeine and conversation. The coffee house also represented a new kind of sobriety. For centuries, the primary social lubricant in Europe had been alcohol. The tavern was a place of boisterous, often drunken camaraderie. The coffee house offered a different model. Here the goal was not intoxication, but stimulation. The mind was meant to be sharpened, not dulled. This shift had profound consequences. It fostered a culture of rational debate and intellectual inquiry that was essential to the Age of Enlightenment. It's no coincidence that an era of unprecedented scientific, philosophical, and political progress was also the era when Europe fell in love with a drink that encouraged you to stay awake and think clearly. As we let these thoughts settle, we can see a common thread weaving through these disparate stories. It is the theme of innovation, of new ways of seeing and interacting with the world. For the Egyptians, it was the innovative use of minerals to create an idealized, divine beauty. For the Australian military, it was the frustrating failure of a technological innovation against an unpredictable natural force. For Tycho Brahe, it was the creation of an innovative scientific institution to map the heavens. And for the patrons of the coffee house, it was a social innovation that changed how people communicated and thought. History is not just a sequence of events, but a long, slow story of new ideas taking hold, for better or for worse. Let's turn back to ancient Egypt and consider the raw materials of their beauty. The kohl for their eyes came from galena, a lead sulfide. The green eyeshadow was malachite, a copper carbonate. These were not just pigments, they were heavy metals. Modern analysis has shown that in the moist environment of the Nile, these lead-based compounds would have stimulated the production of nitric oxide in the skin, which in turn boosts the immune system and can fight off bacterial infections, particularly eye infections like conjunctivitis. So their belief that kohl had magical protective properties was, in a strange way, scientifically sound. It was an intuitive, ancient form of preventative medicine, wrapped in the guise of cosmetic beauty. The first and most important step is the eyes. You take a small pot of galena, a dark gray lead ore, ground into a fine powder. This is kohl, the iconic black eyeliner of ancient Egypt. The wig, too, was a marvel of practical and aesthetic ingenuity. In a climate where head lice were a constant and serious problem, shaving the head was the most effective solution. But a shaved head might not have been considered the peak of beauty, and it offered no protection from the sun. The wig solved both problems. It allowed for intricate, fashionable hairstyles that were impossible. With natural hair, it signaled status, and it kept the sun off one's bald scalp. It was a perfect synthesis of form and function, a solution so effective that it remained a cornerstone of Egyptian fashion for thousands of years, worn by men, women, pharaohs, and commoners alike. Let us also consider the scent of ancient Egypt. It was a world deeply perfumed. They did not have the distillation technology to create liquid perfumes as we know them. Instead, their scents were infused into oils and solid fats, creating fragrant unguents that were applied to the skin and to their wigs. At banquets, a particularly wealthy host might place a cone of this perfumed fat on the heads of their guests. Over the course of the evening, the heat of the body would slowly melt the cone, releasing the perfume and sending fragrant oils trickling down their wigs and shoulders. It's an image of luxury that is both opulent and, to our modern sensibilities, perhaps a little sticky. The symbolism of their chosen colors was also deeply significant. The black of kohl represented fertility, resurrection, and the darkness of the underworld, from which all life emerged. The green of the malachite eyeshadow symbolized new life, growth, and the flourishing vegetation of the Nile Valley after the annual flood. When an Egyptian applied their makeup, they were not just decorating their face, they were painting themselves with the fundamental concepts of their cosmology. They were aligning themselves with the cycles of death and rebirth that governed their entire world, making themselves a small part of a divine and eternal order. Beauty was not vanity. It was a form of worship. And now, as our journey for tonight begins to draw to a close, let's allow all these scenes to gently fade. The bright Egyptian sun, the dusty Australian plains, the cold Danish nights, the smoky London coffee houses. They all recede into the quiet darkness. Let the details blur and soften. The glint of a bronze mirror, the awkward gait of an emu, the shine of a silver nose, the clink of a ceramic coffee cup. They are just echoes now, fragments of stories to accompany you into your own quiet rest. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing to figure out. There is only the gentle, steady rhythm of your own breathing. We return one last time to that first battle of the Emu War, to a moment of profound miscalculation. Major Meredith's strategy was sound, by conventional military standards. He had superior firepower, a defensible position, and a clear objective. What he failed to account for was the nature of his enemy. Emus don't have a command structure. They don't have strategic objectives. They operate on a simple, decentralized algorithm. See food, eat food, see danger. Run in every possible direction. The machine gun, a weapon designed to mow down ranks of soldiers advancing in formation, was utterly useless against this kind of chaotic, leaderless dispersal. The soldiers were prepared for a battle, but the emus were just having a very stressful lunch. The attempt to mount a Lewis gun on a truck is a particularly telling episode. It represents a doubling down on a flawed strategy. If we can't hit them from a stationary position, we will become mobile. The image is pure slapstick. A bouncing truck, a rattling machine gun, a gunner trying desperately to aim, and a flock of emus easily outpacing them over the rough terrain. It's a perfect metaphor for using technology to solve the wrong problem. They had the hardware, but they had fundamentally misunderstood the software of their opponent. The birds were simply too well adapted to their environment, an environment the truck and its occupants were not built for. Let's consider the psychological toll on the soldiers. While the story is humorous in hindsight, for the men on the ground it must have been deeply demoralizing. They were professionals, trained to be effective and lethal. Yet, day after day they were being made to look like fools by a flock of birds. The laughter from the press and the public would have stung. It's one thing to face a fearsome enemy in battle. It's another to become a national punchline. The withdrawal was not just a strategic retreat. It was an admission of defeat in a conflict that should have been, on paper, an overwhelming victory. This tiny, absurd war was a humbling lesson in the limits of human power and the surprising resilience of the natural world. The final resolution, bounties, reveals the true nature of the problem. It was not a military issue. It was an economic and ecological one. The government's initial response was to treat the emus as an invading army. But they were not an army. They were a pest. And pests are not dealt with by declarations of war, but by sustained, decentralized, and economically motivated control measures. The bounty system worked because it empowered the people who were actually affected by the problem, the farmers, and turned the emu from a military target into an economic commodity. It was a less glorious, but far more effective solution. The Great Emu War is a monument to the folly of using a hammer when what you really need is a fly swatter, or in this case, a really good fence. Let us return to the strange and wonderful household of Tycho Brahe. The presence of Jep, his court jester, offers a fascinating glimpse into Tycho's mind. Tycho was a man of science and reason, yet he kept a dwarf at his side whom he believed could see the future. Jep would sit under the dining table, and Tycho would offer him morsels of food, listening to his apparently incoherent babble as if it were prophecy. This blend of rationalism and mysticism was not uncommon in the Renaissance. The world was a place of hidden connections and divine mysteries. For Tycho, observing the precise mathematical dance of the planets and listening to the predictions of a jester were not contradictory activities. They were two different paths to understanding the same enchanted universe. The story of the pet moose is more than just a comical anecdote. It says something about the sheer opulence and strangeness of life at Uraniborg. Who, but a man with the wealth and ego of Tycho Brahe, would keep a full-grown moose as a house pet? The animal was a living symbol of his power and his mastery over his island domain. Its ignominious, drunken death is a moment of pure farce, a ridiculous end for such a majestic creature. It punctures the high-minded seriousness of the scientific enterprise at Uraniborg. It reminds us that this great castle of the heavens was also home to very human, very absurd follies. It was a place of genius, but also a place where a moose could drink too much beer. Using a thin stick of wood or ivory, you carefully draw a thick, almond-shaped line around your entire eye. It's not just for beauty. It's believed to ward off eye infections and deflect the harsh glare of the sun. Let's focus on the instruments themselves. They were works of art. Great mural quadrants were built directly into the walls of the observatory, allowing for incredibly stable and precise measurements of a star's altitude as it crossed the meridian. He had armillary spheres, intricate models of the cosmos made of interlocking brass rings that could measure the positions of celestial objects in multiple coordinate systems. These were not off-the-shelf items. Each one was designed by Tycho and built by his team of craftsmen in the workshops of Uraniborg. They were the pinnacle of pre-telescopic technology, the physical embodiment of his obsession with accuracy. To him, an error of a arc minutes was not a small mistake. It was a failure to properly comprehend the perfection of God's creation. Tycho's legacy is ultimately a paradoxical one. His cosmological system was wrong, his alchemical pursuits led nowhere, his personality was, by most accounts, insufferable. And yet, he is one of the most important figures in the history of science. Why? Because he understood, more than anyone before him, the fundamental importance of good data. He knew that no theory, no matter how elegant or philosophically pleasing, could be valid if it did not match the cold, hard facts of observation. His 20 years of meticulous, obsessive record-keeping created the foundation upon which Kepler and later Newton would build a new universe. He was the indispensable wrong man, the brilliant dead end that pointed the way to the future. Let's drift back to the penny universities of London one more time. Imagine being a young man, new to the city, with a curious mind but no connections and little money. The coffee house would have been a revelation. For a single penny, you could gain access to a world of ideas, news, and brilliant conversation that was previously reserved for the elite. You could sit near a table where famous poets debated, or listen in as merchants discussed voyages to the East Indies. It was an education and an entertainment, a place of social mobility where your wit was worth more than your birth. It was a profoundly democratizing institution, breaking down old social barriers and creating a new public square open to all. The coffee house was also the birthplace of the modern financial newsletter. Entrepreneurs realized that the merchants and investors who frequented certain coffee houses were hungry for reliable information. They began to produce handwritten newsletters summarizing the latest shipping news, commodity prices, and political developments, and would deliver them to the coffee houses for subscribers to read. This was the beginning of a specialized financial press, a service that provided the essential data for a burgeoning capitalist economy. The complex world of global finance, with its endless stream of data and analysis, began as a few handwritten notes passed around a smoky room in a London coffee house. Let us not forget the soundscape of the coffee house. It was not a quiet place for solitary work, as we might think of a cafe today. It was loud. The dominant sound was the continuous hum of conversation, punctuated by arguments, laughter, and the clatter of ceramic cups. Newsreaders would be calling out the latest headlines. Auctions for cargo or stocks might be taking place in a corner. It was a vibrant, chaotic, and highly stimulating environment. The coffee fueled the talk, and the talk fueled the exchange of ideas that was the coffee house's primary purpose. It was a place to connect, to argue, to learn, and to be seen. The eventual decline of the first wave of coffee houses is also instructive. As society changed, the coffee house lost its unique position. Gentlemen's clubs offered more comfort and exclusivity for the wealthy. The rise of the home as a private domestic space meant that men spent more time with their families. And the professionalization of media meant that daily newspapers delivered to the home replaced the coffee house as the primary source of news. But the spirit of the coffee house never died. It lives on in every cafe, every online forum, every public space where strangers gather to exchange ideas. It's a testament to the enduring human need for a third place, a space between home and work where community and conversation can flourish. As we settle deeper into a state of rest, let the mind relax its grip on these stories. Allow them to become what they are, echoes of a time long past. The anxieties of the Egyptian about their appearance in the afterlife, the frustrations of the Australian soldier, the intellectual pride of the Danish astronomer, the commercial buzz of the London merchant. All these worries, these ambitions, have long since dissolved into the quiet of history. Their world, once so vibrant and immediate, is now a dream. And in that, there is a profound sense of peace. Our own worries, our own ambitions are just as fleeting. They too will soften with time. Let that thought be a comfort, a gentle release as you drift further down. The sheer variety of human beauty standards across time is a soothing thought. In ancient Egypt, a shaved head and a heavy wig were the height of fashion. In other times and places, long, flowing natural hair was the ideal. Some cultures have valued plumpness as a sign of wealth and health. Others, like the Egyptians, prized a slender, youthful form. These are not objective truths. They are cultural constructs, as transient as any fashion. Realizing this can be liberating. The pressures we feel to conform to a certain ideal are just one verse in a very long and varied song. They are not permanent, and they are not universal. They are just the style of our particular fleeting moment. The emu's victory was a victory of instinct over intellect. The birds weren't smart in the way a human commander is smart. They didn't have a plan, but they had something more powerful. Millions of years of evolutionary programming. Their chaotic flight response is a highly effective survival strategy against predators who hunt by singling out an individual. The machine gun, on the other hand, is a product of human logic, designed for a logical, predictable battlefield. When logic met instinct on the plains of Australia, instinct won. It's a reminder that the world doesn't always operate on the principles of human reason. There are older, deeper logics at play, and sometimes the best we can do is simply to get out of their way. Consider the silence of Tycho's observatory after he left. The great instruments, once the center of a bustling scientific enterprise, now stood quiet and unused. The island of Hven, once a beacon of knowledge for all of Europe, slowly reverted to being a simple farming community. Uraniborg itself eventually fell into ruin, its bricks carried off by the locals for other buildings. All that remains today are the barest of foundations and the incredible data that Tycho took with him. It's a powerful memento mori for any great project. Even the most ambitious human endeavors are temporary. They have their moment of glory, and then they fade back into the earth. All that truly lasts are the ideas they generate. This dark outline is more than just ancient makeup. It's a deliberate imitation of the markings around the eye of a falcon, symbolizing the protective gaze of the sky god, Horus. Your makeup is a prayer. The coffee house created a marketplace for ideas. In this marketplace, concepts could be introduced, tested, refined, or discarded based on their ability to withstand public debate. This was a new and powerful mechanism for cultural evolution. Ideas like individual rights, religious tolerance, and scientific empiricism were not born in the halls of power, but in the noisy, caffeinated scrum of public conversation. The coffee house provided the necessary infrastructure for the Enlightenment, the physical space where a critical mass of minds could come together and literally talk a new world into being. It's a testament to the power of simply getting people in a room together to talk. And now, let us begin to let go completely. Let the flow of words become a gentle, meaningless current, a river of sound that asks nothing of you. You don't need to follow the narrative anymore. You don't need to remember the names or the dates. The work is done. The stories have been told. Your only task now is to rest, to allow the weight of your body to sink into the surface beneath you, to notice the cool air as you breathe in, and the gentle release as you breathe out. Let each breath carry you a little further away from the waking world, into the peaceful, quiet country of sleep. The history is over. Now is the time for rest. Let's linger on the concept of the afterlife in the Egyptian mindset as it relates to their idea of beauty. It wasn't just about looking good for the gods. The preservation of the body through mummification and the preservation of the individual's likeness through statues and art were crucial for the soul's survival. The soul, or Ba, needed to be able to recognize its own body to return to it each night. So a perfectly preserved mummy and an idealized, recognizable portrait were not vanity. They were essential spiritual technology. The cosmetic tools left in the tomb were part of this. They ensured that the deceased could maintain their physical form and identity for eternity, ensuring a successful journey through the afterlife. It was a profoundly practical approach to immortality. We can contrast the hot war against the emus with the Cold War that followed, the War of Fences. The construction of the State Barrier Fence of Western Australia was a monumental undertaking, an attempt to draw a line in the sand against the migrating birds. It was a slow, laborious, and expensive process, but it was based on an understanding of the emus' actual behavior rather than a desire for a quick, dramatic victory. It's a less exciting story than the one with machine guns, but it's a story of quiet competence and long-term thinking. It represents a shift from a mindset of conflict to a mindset of management, which is often the more mature and effective way to deal with persistent problems, whether they are feathered or otherwise. Tycho Brahe's relationship with his sister, Sophia Brahe, is a fascinating and often overlooked part of his story. Sophia was a brilliant woman in her own right, a self-taught botanist, chemist, and horticulturalist. She frequently assisted Tycho in his astronomical observations at Uraniborg and was his collaborator in his alchemical experiments. In an age when women were almost entirely excluded from the world of science, Sophia was a respected, if unofficial, partner in the great scientific enterprise on Heaven. Her presence reminds us that even in the most patriarchal of times, talented and determined women found ways to contribute to the great intellectual currents of their age, even if their contributions were often uncredited or forgotten by history. The very name coffee has a wonderfully convoluted history. It entered the English language from the Dutch word koffie. The Dutch got it from the Ottoman Turkish kahve. The Turks got it from the Arabic kahwa. The origin of the Arabic word itself is debated. It might refer to the Kaffa region of Ethiopia, the legendary home of the bean, or it may have originally meant wine, and was transferred to coffee because of its similarly intoxicating, albeit intellectual, effect. This long chain of borrowing is a testament to the journey of the bean itself. As it passed from culture to culture, each one giving it a new name and a new meaning, a perfect linguistic fossil of its global journey. The simple act of preparing for sleep is its own historical ritual. For most of human history, the period after sunset was a time of darkness, danger, and inactivity. The invention of artificial light, from the campfire to the candle to the electric lamp, slowly pushed back that darkness and transformed our relationship with the night. But our bodies still hold the memory of that ancient rhythm, the urge to seek shelter, to find a safe and comfortable place, and to let our minds go quiet as the world darkens, is a deep and primal one. As you lie here now, you are participating in a ritual that connects you to every ancestor who ever sought rest at the end of a long day. The Egyptian ideal of beauty was intrinsically linked to their environment. The clean lines of their art and architecture echo the stark, flat landscape of the desert, broken only by the sharp line of the river. The colors they favored, the gold of the sun, the blue of the water and sky, the green of the riverbank vegetation, were the colors of their world. Their beauty standards were not an arbitrary invention, they were an aesthetic reflection of the geography and cosmology that shaped their civilization. They saw beauty in order, in clarity, and in the vibrant pulse of life that thrived in an otherwise harsh environment. They made themselves in the image of the world they knew. The emu's ultimate survival strategy wasn't just its speed or its chaotic dispersal, it was its sheer reproductive efficiency. The military could kill 1,000 birds, but the emus could easily replace those numbers in the next breeding season. They were fighting a war of attrition that the army, with its limited budget and political mandate, could never win. The emus were a renewable resource of frustration. This highlights a fundamental imbalance when human institutions try to combat natural processes. Nature operates on cycles of seasons and generations, while human efforts are often constrained by budgets, elections, and quarterly reports. The timescale is hopelessly mismatched. Tycho Brahe's death, whether from a burst bladder or mercury poisoning, is a story about the vulnerabilities of the human body. Here was a man who measured the cosmos, who mapped the eternal and unchanging stars with godlike precision. Yet his own life was subject to the same frailties and accidents as any other mortal. His bladder, a humble and undignified organ, may have been his undoing, or his passion for alchemy, his desire to unlock the secrets of matter, may have poisoned him from within. It's a stark reminder that no matter how high our intellects may soar, we are forever tethered to the fragile, messy reality of our physical existence.